So the Supreme Court actually did a couple things that were good this week, which is rare. And it's definitely a glimmer of hope for conservative libertarians or people just with a general sense of what life is. But I must admit, how the leftist machine keeps people wrapped up in this unending fantasy is like a top-tier Jedi mind trick. Now remember, the Supreme Court doesn't have the ability to pick which cases it decides upon. A rule has to be supposedly broken, and then it has to go through a lengthy legal process to even get to them in the first place. And then their job is to decide upon the constitutionality of it. Activist Supreme Court judges don't care too much about the constitutionality of things, which is why they change the definition of words, say that the document is outdated, or interpret it to supposedly fit modern ideological values. This naturally is a threat to the United States and really just the world at large, because the U.S. Constitution is probably the most significant document ever written to protect the rights of the individual in the history of human existence. And that, coupled with the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence, are likely the three most important documents to ever be written in human history as it relates to governance and the freedom of all citizens. Which means that preserving it, despite the fact that the waves of ideological values can change over time, is extremely important. As in summation, it essentially states that the rights of the individual outweigh all else, and the decision of those individuals to be governed may only be done with the consent of the governed. In simple terms, the Leaky Depends administration contested that under the 2003 HEROES Act, that the executive branch could basically just by decree forgive of hundreds of millions of dollars of student loans. Forgiving means shouldering the burden on the remainder of the U.S. taxpayers. Because there is no free lunch, even though these clowns fail to understand how things work or what money even is. The law basically states that in the event of an emergency, that they could forgive these student loans because people would end up worse financially as a result of the emergency itself. The emergency, of course, being the lockdown, which came many, many moons after a lot of these loans even originated, and everybody was compensated for that anyhow. But what's important to remember about this Supreme Court decision and not anything else is that two wrongs don't make a right. And this rule is supremely unconstitutional. If you see here from this article from NBC, approximately 43 million Americans would have been eligible to participate in this plan and would have cost more than $400 billion. Last time I checked, there's over 330 million Americans, many of whom don't pay tax at all or ever go to college, but the remainder, the ones that do pay taxes, would be responsible for footing the bill for these 43 million people. But instead of getting in the weeds of this decision, let's talk about what it means. Because the Joey Oops, I've got the Squirts administration used the fact that they were going to provide debt relief as a rallying cry for Gen Z and young voters to encourage them to vote for them. They essentially bribed young people with this promise that they were going to get them off on their debts, and then pushed forward this thing that was clearly going to fail by any person that understands any logic. And then they take the fact that it was struck down and use it to blame the Supreme Court or pretend that it's illegitimate or blame it on Republicans. It's like next level Jedi mind trick. It's brilliant if you're emotionally manipulating clueless young people or people that don't understand how money works. Now, before we get into the weeds, if you want to complain about money, again, you can't say something like, oh, well, PPP loans were forgiven, but not these. Two wrongs don't make a right. First of all, PPP loans shouldn't even have existed in the first place. The CARES Act shouldn't exist in the first place. And if you want to compare apples to apples, how about we don't pay $100 billion to the Crane and still pay for this? So again, two wrongs don't make a right here. It's unfair to compare all of these things. You have to look at one individual thing. Leftists and people just do that because they want to emotionally manipulate you by taking you off the scent, by finding some apples to oranges comparison, knowing that most people are financially inept and won't understand the difference between the two things. And because people just don't understand how things work and social media is used to emotionally manipulate people that don't understand things, any type of event like this, especially one that relates to the constitutionality of something, becomes a weapon and an instigator for some of the worst takes of all time, like this one from this Instagram account. So look at what it says at the top, and this is about something completely different, a different court case that happened to come down in the same day. Students of color are not legally entitled to an even playing field in college admissions. You see, they say the complete opposite of what is the actual truth. What the Supreme Court decision as it relates to that is it actually did make it an even playing field, but whatever. But here's what I'm talking about. They are legally required to pay off the crushing debt that disproportionately affects them. First of all, nobody made you go to college. Nobody legally required you to take out a loan. Nobody forced you to do that. Many jobs and careers don't even need a college education, and 50 years ago, 10% of people went to college and the country is just fine. So yeah, legally requiring you to pay off a debt that you take, which otherwise would be paid by the taxpayers who didn't take it, should be legally required. And the reason that it's supposedly crushing is because the federal government has gotten its dirty, filthy paws involved in higher learning and run the price up. They inflated it. They are the exact reason why it's so expensive in the first place, but whatever. And then something like it disproportionately affects them. Again, you choose to take a loan. You choose to do it. Here's another big brain take from this same Instagram account. Now remember, the leftist, the Joey Leakey Depends administration, they knew that this wasn't going to pass the sniff test. They knew that this wasn't legal. They knew this wasn't going to pass. But they used it to sell people that didn't understand that so that they could secure their vote. And then when it gets struck down, they can blame anybody but the Constitution. They can blame anybody but them. So here's a meme that they posted. This person voted to keep you in debt. They didn't vote to keep you in debt. That's not how this works. And then they're showing the amount that the justices paid for college and then what the tuition is now. First of all, the difference in price has a lot to do with inflation. If you just use normal inflation numbers, a lot of those estimated original tuitions are double what they are and are double that now. And the rest of those costs being so increased has more to do with the Fed inflation as a result of ridiculous and gross government spending like this would have been if they forgave this debt. And this decision has nothing to do with the individual choosing to keep you in debt. That's not how it works. Because a lot of the people that are complaining about them choosing to keep you in debt are kind of like this woman. This progressive state senator, of course, liar, talks about how she graduated with all this debt in 2012. This is 11 years ago. First of all, an attorney is one of the highest paid salaries in America, and in 11 years, you should have been able to figure out a way to pay that off. Or at the very least, consolidate it based on your income. And either way, it was your decision to take the loan in the first place. But the internet is undefeated. And look what this person followed up with. This exact same person purchased a $1.14 million home in New York. And she, among the woe is me liars that are emotionally manipulating people to believe that the long Pen 15 of the state is crushing them with this debt that they chose to take in the first place. But they're out there with the brand new iPhone and the luxury bag and the brand new shoes and the new car, and in this case, a $1.14 million house. It's always woe is me, I'm the victim. And every other taxpayer, including people that don't live in a $1.14 million house, it should be on them. They should be on the hook to pay off the debt that I chose so I could get a high value degree that will pay me more money than 95% of American citizens. And on top of all this, through the lockdown, a lot of people made more money getting paid out by the government to sit at home with no additional expenses like driving to work or dry cleaning their clothes or whatever for a long period of time. And over that time, they didn't have to pay their student loans or any interest for years. They had plenty of an opportunity to get ahead and pay a lot of these debts down. But the Joey Leakey Depends administration sold them this dream, this promise that one day that they would get it paid off for free. So a lot of them just took the money and squandered it. So they go on vacation and buy expensive things and spend above their means, and they expect the taxpayer to foot the bill. And then they say something like, oh, PPP loans or some other thing to take you off the scent. Liars. But what's so brilliant about this whole thing and why it's such a Jedi mind trick is that they create this illusion that they're going to pay everybody off. They pretend when it gets denied that the Supreme Court is illegitimate, or it's the Republicans, or it's their fault, or they find some strange comparison, and then they can question the authority of that institution to begin with, like this take from this bartender. We have checks and balances in America. It's one thing that makes us great. And the executive branch doesn't have the authority by decree to just give people a tax break like this, because that's what it is. It's a tax break. You're just taking a debt burden away from 43-something million people and shouldering it on the rest of the people without getting it approved from Congress, citing some unconstitutional arbitrary law from 2003 that has nothing to do with it, knowing that it's going to get struck down, but you can achieve all of your ends by getting people to vote for you and cheer from you. And then when it gets struck down, even though that's what you knew was going to happen, you could pretend like it's the Supreme Court's fault. And then you have people like this bartender say things like it's authoritarianism when she wouldn't know authoritarianism if it ordered a Moscow Mule on the rocks. It's so funny. Look at these bullet points from Liar Business Insider. Oh, the New York Democrat says that the court is taking over the role of the legislature. No, the executive is taking over the role of the legislature. The Supreme Court is acting on our behalf, the taxpayer. And look, she says they are acting as though they are Congress, calling it a dangerous trend. No, the dangerous trend is the executive acting without Congress. These people are such disingenuous liars, and AOC is grossly unqualified for this job. This girl was making Moscow mules in a New York City Bogota a couple of years ago until she got plucked from obscurity, American Idol style, so that the shadowy demons that run the world could use her youthful exuberance, youthful face, and social media adequacy to ram through the most authoritarian ideals and ridiculous progressive garbage known to man under the guise of fighting for the little guy, and then in concert make her a celebrity and send her to the ball in a big white gown, putting a familiar face on the long pen 15 of destruction. She's being used just like her constituents are, but they're too clueless to understand it. But don't worry, folks, because there's always a new grift on the way. Because now, in Leaky Depends' new plan to basically avoid the Constitution again, because here comes the next way that they're going to dangle the carrot to continue to garner your support, pretending like this literal demon is fighting for you. It's highly probable that this and whatever else they propose in this realm will be struck down because it's not legal. And even though you could compare a variety of other things that they do that are absolutely absurd, again, you have to compartmentalize each individual thing. Because this tweet from Jake Hoffman is one of the most articulate counterpoints and follow-ups to this whole predicament. He mentions how the right should campaign on fixing student loans. Because again, a lot of these people just don't understand. The Gen Z and the millennials, they're not understanding what's going on. And it's our responsibility to properly articulate what's going on here, as opposed to them just thinking that we're strong-arming them and saying no. Because the three most inflated sections in the American economy, even before the Corona clap, were healthcare, college tuition, and college textbooks, because of the bureaucracy. These schools have plenty of money, and because the bureaucracy is a horrible negotiator and completely inept at business, they don't hold these schools to account. They're just getting rich off of this. Now, the lesson that's important to understand from all this is, though, even though the right or the conservative view or the libertarian view of things may be factually correct, may be fiscally responsible, and may be constitutionally correct, okay, we are getting outmaneuvered on marketing and branding. And even though we may be correct to the Constitution, correct and just to the taxpayer, we're not explaining it properly, and thus it's getting lost in the fray. Meaning though that even though that they are losing, they're still emotionally manipulating enough people. We're bringing facts and logic and reason and constitutionality up in a fight against emotion. So until we figure out how to play their game, and more importantly, how to market to people who have been emotionally manipulated, we're gonna lose even when we win. Because remember, free money is a compelling pitch, and these people are not gonna stop fighting for this, even though it's wrong. Because the remainder of America and the remainder of the free world doesn't always have stable geniuses like Bobby Sausalito, aka Bobby Financials, explaining and articulating these items one by one like this. Because this decision and the subsequent fight around it all plays into the exact same thing, which is complete totalitarian control, socialism, communism, and the destruction of the individual, and making them all a ward of the state. This is just yet another piece in that game. So if we can't come up with a continually compelling marketing and branding pitch as to why these things are wrong, eventually we will lose. The fight continues. Please share this video.